Welcome back, motorized bike enthusiast. We have a few topics to cover in today's video, so timestamps down in the description if you're here for a specific category. In order, here's what we're doing. We're taking the Huffy Cranbrook with the seeutek PK80 on a 26-mile trip as we discuss updates on the bike to find out how everything's been holding up. Then we go ahead and decide to squeeze some performance out of it by replacing the cylinder with a fresh port clean cylinder, and we'll find out how that went, as it's the first time I've ever tried to do any kind of port work. All in all, we did gain performance, but we ran into some issues along the way, which we will diagnose and find out what the problem was. I also have a few tips that might help save your motor in the future, so be sure to watch out for those. And at the end of the video, we almost destroyed this motor completely after doing all this work because I forgot to do something very simple. So stay tuned to the end of the video to find out what it was. All in all, the Huffy Cranbrook's been a pretty good build. It has the seeutek PK80 on it, and you guys know I really like that motor. First motor I ever bought. In the last video, we had to replace the head because it became cracked, and ever since we've never quite had the peak performance that this motor originally came with. Originally, this motor could do 32 miles an hour without a problem, but lately I have barely been able to get 30, and it's kind of sluggish. So we want to go ahead and see if we can pump some more performance out of it. But first, we're going to go ahead and take it on a nice long trip just so we get a good solid feel for the bike to make sure that any performance gains we get, we'll know right away. The bike handled the trip just fine. I didn't have any issues, but it didn't have very much power. Our top speed for the entire day was about 30 miles an hour, and it really struggled to get that. But this was a beautiful trip, so I'm going to give you guys some of the highlights.
Growing up, parents got me a guitar. Said you could do anything, kid, you could go far. You could be the president, fireman, race cars. The sky's the limit, kid, so shoot for the stars. So I strummed that guitar every day. Found a passion for music, never went away. I joined a couple bands and played a few shows. Tried to impress the girl in the front row. But soon enough, everything starts to change. As you grow up, nobody treats you the same. They try to take your future and make it real safe. You could be a doctor, accountant, or something sane. But yo, whatever happened to the sky was the limit. I fell in love with music, never thought it was a gimmick. I worked so hard on every tune and every single lyric. My whole identity depended on being artistic. Now you wanna strip that away, so you feel okay? Cause if I make it to the top, what does that really say? That you shouldn't have given up, that you made the mistake? But if I fail, you feel much better about picking your lane, right? Yeah, things are gonna get better real soon. Yeah, I'ma just do me, you just do you. I swear it's gonna get better real soon. Don't let anyone tell you what you should do. I got a clear view.
Alright, for an update on all the accessories that we added to the bike, I'm going to skim through this section pretty quick because I know most of you are here for the performance enhancements and diagnosis part of the video, along with the tips. So for anybody curious on how all this junk's been holding up that we put on the bike, I'll say it came to be just about as expected, with all cheap stuff. The first thing to go were the bar-in mirrors with the turn signals. They pretty much just vibrated themselves out of the handlebars, and they were such a pain in the neck to put in the first place that I didn't bother to put them back in because they were just a headache. So I replaced them with just this one little single side mirror here, which of course didn't last very long either. The vibration shook the mirror off of it. Moving right along, the horn has stopped working. Not quite sure why, just doesn't work. The Speedometer is a big disappointment. To make it even worse, when you're just cruising along, the numbers are pretty sporadic, as it jumps all over the place between high and low numbers. Can't figure that out. So the only thing it's really good for now is a clock and a thermometer, which I guess I'll leave it on the bike for that, because it weighs almost nothing. The rear light assembly with the turn signals, brake light, and running light, the cheapest thing we put on the bike, has ironically been holding up the best. We did quite a bit to waterproof it and reduce vibrations it would see, but it's been holding up just fine. My rear lights, turn signals, and brake lights all still work. The battery bank, it's been holding up just fine. We've waterproofed that pretty good. And the turn signals work, so the flasher's still working.
Hey, little buddy. Let's get you across this road, huh? Ooh. He's pretty plump. What's up, buddy? You gonna say hi? Let's get him on out of here. Looks like he was going this way. Good luck, little dude. Don't get run over, right?
As you know, we also went ahead and upgraded the rear wheel and hub assembly to a beefier setup with thicker spokes, and that wheel's been doing just fine. I need to go and retighten the wheel bearings as they've loosened up after braking, but so far it's doing great. Some of you may have noticed that this is actually the only bike that I'm using a clamp-on style hub adapter. Well, because it's a coaster brake, and those are just a lot easier to work with. But we are still using the stock size of a 44-tooth sprocket, so that'll help keep track of all of our performance numbers. We're going to stick with that for now. And now for our critical engine tip of the video, which is something you should never do. This is mostly geared towards new builders who don't realize this yet, and yes, I'm guilty of this myself, as on my first bike for a long time I didn't realize you couldn't do this. This is common sense to a lot of the older guys, but here it is. For the 2 strokes, not the 4 strokes, never coast on the engine. If you're pulling hard on the throttle, going fast, and then need to slow down, the moment you let off the throttle, you need to pull in the clutch. Also, if you're going down a hill, never use the engine to drag. You might think that using the engine drag will help save your brake pads by slowing you down. Yes, it technically will, but it's really bad on these 2 strokes. See, they get all their oil from the gas mix. When the throttle's open, they're getting the oil they expect. But when you close the throttle at high RPMs and leave the engine engaged, they're starved of oil. This will score the walls and the piston and will cause you to rebuild your top end quite quickly. So for the newer builders, anytime you let off the throttle, as a general rule of thumb, pull in the clutch. Never coast on the motor. So after a nice long trip and getting a good feel for how the bike is performing, I decided to go ahead and take the extra cylinder that we purchased and port it. Well, kind of. See, I've never dug deep into the information provided for port work, and a lot of the videos out there seem to contradict other videos. It's hard to trust a 12-year-old kid with a shaky camera telling you how to port a cylinder. But there are some reliable sources. I found a lot of information from two-stroke stuffing. This guy, he builds two-stroke motors, and he does a lot of work, and he even has the dyno. So the information I got from him, I kind of took it to the bank, along with a few other bits and pieces here and there. I decided to go ahead and just start simple. Not changing any timing, not widening any ports, but just go ahead and clean out the ports and bevel a few edges. Get rid of any excess material I could find, and polish them out best as I can. Well, let's see if it made a difference. I know in the camera it can be kind of hard to tell, and it still does look rough, but when you run your finger across it, everything feels nice and smooth. It's really hard to get in there. I don't have an angle adapter for my Dremel, so I just had to work with the big bulky one I had. And I did a lot more than I thought I could, but I got rid of the lips in the transfer port, which were pretty severe, which I think all in all is probably going to make the biggest difference. Went ahead and polished the intake and exhaust as well, and added a slight bevel to the sides of both the intake and exhaust ports. The intake manifold that came with the new cylinder had really thick walls and a misaligned tube. I did my best to remove as much material as I could without weakening the walls, and I beveled the intake side, but at the end of the day I decided to use the one that came with the seeutek as it just looked a lot better. A bit of an unfortunate situation, which I was worried about, is that the piston won't work with this engine, the new one that is. The mounting point for the piston pin is higher on the new one than it is on the seeutek's. And if I'm correct, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that means that the new piston is designed for a 40mm stroke, and the seeutek has the smaller 37 or 38mm stroke. I'm really not sure which one it is. Well, that's good because it means I got a spare piston for my Zeta 4040. But I was worried that there might be some mating surface issues using the old piston on a new cylinder. If the piston is damaged or warped in any way, it could cause some fitting issues, scoring, gouging, all that good fun stuff. I also wasn't sure if there might be some timing issues. With a different piston, I think there might be different cylinders with different port positions. We'll find out later if that's true or not. I went ahead and decided to shave down a little bit of the piston on the intake side so at top dead center it completely clears the intake port. Now I'm not sure if this is a good or a bad thing for a stock setup. This might be more beneficial to somebody with a reed valve. This will change your timing a little bit on the intake side because the port will open sooner and stay open longer. So apologies for the quick night testing. I ran out of time and had to go to work, but I wanted to get the motor up and running as soon as possible. I did actually take it to work with me that night. Now what I was doing here was holding the choke high at full throttle to get some fresh gas mist all over the new cylinder and on any parts of the piston that I might have cleaned off by accident. I also forgot to put an exhaust gasket on. We'll take care of that in a little bit. I went ahead and took this bike with me to work after a quick test ride around the block. Here's what I noticed. When I hit the long stretch of road that I normally test my bikes on, it pulled really good on the low end. It had all of its torque back, which made me happy. Then it hit mid RPMs, even at full throttle, and it kind of just lazy, slowly gaining power, and all of a sudden when it got up into the high RPMs it got some power and it pulled better than it's ever pulled. Well, took it to work, came home the next morning and immediately started working on the bike again to get everything finished that we kind of missed. I still needed to widen the exhaust gasket and clean up the intake gasket.
You gonna bark a whole bunch like you did in the last video? Okay. I got it. I'm gonna try and fix it. Yeah, no problem.
So after matching the intake and exhaust gaskets to their appropriate ports, I decided to go ahead and bevel out the inlet side of the muffler to give the exhaust gases a little bit of a smoother surface to flow against. Probably won't make much of a difference, but remember, it's every little bit helps on these small motors. After that, I decided to go ahead and take a look at the cylinder to see how it's mating to the new piston, or I should say how the old piston is mating to the new cylinder. And after close examination, which is hard to tell because of lighting, I didn't see any issues and gave it the good old fingernail test, and I didn't catch any rough edges. So that looks good. I decided now to go ahead and play with the jets on the carburetor. So I've never done jetting before. I'm at about 150 feet in elevation. And from what I hear, a stock 70 jet is pretty good. I've never really had any reason to believe it's not, as my bikes never four-stroke at full throttle unless there's an issue. Well, getting the jet on and off was tricky. I purchased a set off of Amazon which claims they were for these engines, but the threads were certainly different, and I could never quite get it to match up. So after some questionable forcing techniques, we were able to get the 65 jet mounted in the carburetor. Now 65 is probably pretty low considering my elevation. Running quite a bit lean, but I decided to go ahead and try it and just see if I noticed a difference.
Oh, that's gonna bug me for a while. I have another one to put on there. It's on my massive list of things to do. That's new.
I tried to stay upbeat, but honestly this was a gutting feeling. To say the bike was running was a technicality. It was running like crap. It was misfiring and backfiring in all throttled positions. Now, this was really mind-boggling because the bike ran great to and from work after we replaced the parts and did the port work. The only thing we did today was change a jet, bevel the muffler, and clean up the intake and exhaust gaskets. That's it. So if it was going to be a port timing issue, that would have shown up right away before we even left to go to work. Now, I want you guys to take that information that I just gave you and try and figure out in your head what you think would be the problem. And let me give you a hint. Google search won't help you on this one, because that was the first thing I tried. Scouring Google forums, trying to find out what can cause a two-stroke to misfire and backfire. I started thinking about everything we've done to the bike. I even went as far to double check the muffler, taking the cap off to make sure there was no residual water that maybe got trapped in the baffles. I washed it out with water to get the shavings so they wouldn't get sucked back into the motor. Shook it out, gave it plenty of time to dry. Obviously, this wasn't the problem. I started thinking about other things I'd done to the bike, because with my luck working on these bikes, I'll change some critical components, but something else somewhere else on the bike that's not related to anything we're doing becomes an issue. That's what it was in my case. I had moved the CDI wires just slightly to get them out of the way of the exhaust, and doing that, unbeknownst to me, disconnected one of the wires, causing it to just barely touch its connector. This whole time I had gone back and forth on the jets, taken the carburetor off and cleaned it, double checked the head, cylinder, make sure that everything was torqued down correctly, when all in all, the entire time, it was just a stupid connector.
Alright, I just fired it up and it sounded like it was going to work. Let's hope for sure. Hell yeah.
I've never been able to get the speedometer on the bike to be reliable, we decided to do our pulls with the GPS. On flat ground, with the 65 jet and modifications we did to the motor, we got a top speed of 34 miles an hour, which is 2 miles an hour faster than the bike's ever gone on its best day. Flat ground, of course. The bike ran pretty good. The engine sounded good, the throttle response was great, revving up and down quickly, but unfortunately once we got to high RPMs it kind of just gives up. This isn't the same feeling as when your bike is climbing and it slowly tapers off at its maximum performance. No, it was climbing, and then hits a wall. That tells me that the bike is running too lean, starving of fuel, which I kind of expected being at 150-foot elevation on a 65 jet. But hey, we had to try it anyways. We went ahead and put the 70 jet back in the bike and went out to do another GPS pull. And that is where we almost destroyed the motor. During that clip, you could hear the motor started out really strong, was pulling hard, and I thought that we were going to get a nice top speed and the video could end there. Unfortunately, it just completely cut out and hit a wall, but this was different than before. This was the kind of lack of power that makes you think you just blew the motor. Getting only a top speed of 31 miles an hour, it started to miss and four-stroke, and sucked. Well, there's know-it-alls who will post in the comments of videos every time they hear four-stroking that you're running too rich, and that is simply not the case. That's one of the things that can cause it, but there's other issues, such as lack of compression, bad port timing, or an intake issue, one of which we had, and I ran the motor for about 1.5 miles at about half throttle, because that's all she would do, before I pulled over and found the issue. This entire time we were causing irreparable damage to the motor, which is really disheartening considering everything we've been through.
Can't believe it was still running. Well, somehow it was still running. Of course, that probably gave us about the leanest mixture we could possibly have. If anything was going to destroy the cylinder and piston, that would be it right there. Damn. Well, she'll still run fine. I just don't know if that's going to get worse. Or how quickly that's going to get worse. Of course it's going to get worse, I just don't know how fast. It's a real small gouge. I can just barely catch it with my fingernail. I had taken the carburetor on and off so many times that day to diagnose issues and play with jets that I simply forgot to tighten the clamp on the carburetor, causing it to vibrate loose under engine vibration and literally just bounce around on the tip of the intake manifold. I really don't even know how I had enough fuel to keep running, but needless to say, it was an extremely lean mixture, sucking in a lot of excess air, essentially having the same, if not worse, effect of letting off the throttle and not pulling in the clutch as we discussed earlier in the video. All in all, it only had one small etch in the cylinder, which I was able to just barely catch with my fingernail. It's so minor, I don't think it's going to cause us any performance hits, but it's always going to be in the back of my mind knowing that's there, possibly causing a lack of compression after all the work we just did to the motor. So guys, don't forget to tighten the clamp on your carburetor. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and do another pull to see what we're getting after tightening everything, and I'm getting rid of this stupid support clamp on the muffler. A commenter kept nagging me in all my videos to put this on, but it's so flimsy there's no way this is going to protect the muffler if you hit something, and all it does is rattle around and make annoying sounds. So goodbye to that garbage.
Hey, 36.
Getting a top speed of 36 miles an hour and regaining the low-end torque that this motor was missing was the relief I needed after all this mess, diagnosing issues, and the time spent cleaning up the ports on the cylinder. This is all stuff you don't see in the video due to editing and time constraints, but the cylinder work took a while, done with little hand files, sandpaper, and the fat Dremel tool. It was over the course of 2 days. Really is just a time killer while I watched videos. But I'm really happy with what we got. The motor is running faster than it's ever been, and this might actually be the fastest bike I own. I haven't tested the YD100 yet for max speed. There's other things we can do to it. Next, I might try drilling a small hole in the exhaust cap to see if we can open up a little more airflow, but I also have to keep in mind you need to have some back pressure on these motors, because yes, even the stock exhaust provides back pressure needed for the 2-cycle engines. Anyways, we might order another jug and an angle adapter for my Dremel, really try and open up some ports and see what we can do with some proper port work. But for now, I'm happy with what we got. 36 miles an hour might not seem like much of a gain, but when you consider how small these motors are, and you consider the top speed only being about 30 miles an hour, an extra 6 is pretty good. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one. Ride safe.